Hey guys, Dan here with another tech video. Today I have for you a weed whacker carburetor that no longer works properly because all the rubber stuff within it has gone all stiff with age, and I have some spare parts over here that I'm going to be putting into it later. So I figured this is a great time to sort of explain how a carburetor works. Now, basically, the point of a carburetor is to mix fuel with the air going into the engine so your engine has something to burn. Contrary to popular belief, the gas pedal is actually an air pedal. What I mean by that is that in a carbureted engine, whenever you press the accelerator, a butterfly valve opens like this, letting more air into the engine. Now, the point of the carburetor is to adjust for how much air is going into the engine and put more or less fuel, according to that, into the air. The way a carburetor works is that it has something called a venturi within it. Now, the venturi is a restriction in the size of this pipe that happens somewhere behind that valve. Don't know how well you can see that. The point of that is that whenever you force air from a big pipe into a smaller pipe, it speeds up. Now, according to Bernoulli's principle, air that moves faster has a lower pressure than air that is static, and that lower pressure is what sucks up fuel into the airstream. The purpose of the carburetor is to make sure that the right amount of fuel goes into it and that it gets atomized or made into a really fine mist so it burns properly. Now, one way that carburetors achieve this is by having a small orifice under which is a bowl. Now, the bowl usually holds fuel and it has a float within it. So the float rises or falls with the level of fuel that is within the bowl. Now, this float is attached to a valve that lets more or less fuel into it. So as the float rises up with the fuel level, it slowly shuts off that valve so that less fuel goes into the bowl, and therefore it meters out the engine correctly, so it takes in fuel at a steady rate. Now, this being a weed whacker and a weed whacker carburetor means that it has to work in any sort of orientation because you move weed whackers around. The engine doesn't just stay in one place. Now, because of this, you can't use a float, because if you have it at an odd angle, the float could close the valve completely without actually there being any fuel in it. So the way this is achieved in this carburetor is that instead of a bowl, it has a little membrane here, which I'm going to show you. So the membrane fills up with fuel or empties out, and then the position of the membrane is what actually actuates the valve that lets in more or less fuel. So there's one screw out. And the other one. And here we can see this membrane. So this is what moves up and down with the fuel, depending on how much there is in there. This is rather old and kind of stiff, so it's not really working that well anymore. What you can see here is the mechanism that moves the valve. So the membrane either pushes on this or lets it go further, and in there's a little needle valve that stoppers the fuel coming in. So if this is pressed down, meaning there's little fuel in it, the needle valve opens up, fills it up with fuel, then the membrane moves away, slowly closing, letting this go back in, closing the needle valve. What this does is that it slows down the fuel coming in. So I'm just going to take apart the needle valve assembly here. You gotta be careful with these because there's a little spring in it that'll make this stuff fly everywhere. There we go. So there's the little rocker arm that holds on to the membrane, and in there we can see the needle valve, which is just a pin or a needle. Another spring and needle valve. So this goes up and down into a valve and into a seat, and it determines the flow of fuel. Now, another cool thing with these little carburetors is that you have this pump up here, so this sucks in fuel for when you start it up, but after it has a little built-in fuel pump into it. So basically what happens is that your two-stroke engine has waves of high and low pressure in the crankcase, and these are connected here. So this little hole here lets in waves of pressure into this upper part, and those waves of pressure drive a pump. Now the pump is very simple. It's just a membrane, really. Here, let me try and get this apart so you guys can see. Now, I'm not really sure which paths it takes to do this, but it's quite intricate and quite interesting. So this is just to start it up, and then you can see this membrane here, which probably moves up and down, pulling in more fuel with the pressure waves caused by the engine itself. Great way to get fuel into the engine, into the carburetor parts, so that it goes into the engine correctly. And that is basically the inside of a weed whacker carburetor, so I'm gonna get to work at putting this back together now. See you guys later.